January 17, 1991. Major Marie Rossi is piloting a CH-47 Chinook helicopter deep into Iraq on the first night of the war. She's leading a flight of helicopters resupplying troops at a forward position. Iraqi anti-aircraft fire lights up the night sky around her. Tracers streak past her cockpit. She keeps flying. Her mission is critical. Those troops need ammunition and supplies. The fact that she's a woman making history as one of the first female combat pilots means nothing right now. She's just a pilot doing her job. And she's not alone. 40,000 American women deployed to Desert Storm. This is their story. Welcome back to Gulf War Chronicles. Today we're talking about something that changed the U.S. military forever: women in combat roles during Desert Storm. This was the largest deployment of military women in American history up to that point. They flew aircraft, drove trucks, operated Patriot missile batteries, repaired equipment, provided medical care, and served in roles that put them closer to combat than any previous war. 13 women died. 2 were taken prisoner. And they proved beyond any doubt that women belonged in the military. Let's talk about what they accomplished. First, the numbers. 41,000 American military women deployed to the Gulf region during Desert Storm. That was about 7% of total U.S. forces deployed. Compare that to Vietnam, where women were mostly limited to nursing roles and numbered in the hundreds. Desert Storm was a quantum leap in women's military participation, and they served in almost every role except direct ground combat infantry. The legal situation was complicated. In 1991, women were officially barred from direct combat roles. They couldn't serve in infantry, armor, or special forces. But the reality of Desert Storm blurred those lines. Women flew helicopters into combat zones. They operated Patriot missile batteries that shot at incoming Scuds, that's combat. They drove fuel trucks in convoys that got attacked, that's combat. The old distinctions between combat and support roles didn't make sense anymore. Major Rossi, who I mentioned at the beginning, commanded an aviation company. She flew dozens of missions during Desert Storm, including some of the most dangerous night resupply missions deep into Iraq. She became one of the most visible female service members of the war. Tragically, she died in a helicopter crash on March 1, 1991, just hours after the ceasefire. She was 25 years old. Her death highlighted both the contributions women were making and the risks they were taking. Captain Cynthia Mosley flew UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters during the ground war. She described the experience in interviews afterward. "Nobody cared that I was a woman when we were flying missions. What mattered was, could you fly the aircraft? Could you navigate in a sandstorm? Could you land in a hot zone? Gender was irrelevant. Competence was everything." Women operated Patriot missile batteries that defended against Iraqi Scud attacks. When Scuds were incoming toward Saudi bases or Israeli cities, women were the ones launching Patriots to intercept them. Specialist Adrienne Mitchell was on a Patriot crew in Saudi Arabia. She later said, "We trained just like the men, we deployed just like the men, we did the same job under the same pressure." When a Scud's incoming, nobody's thinking about gender. They're thinking about stopping that missile. The 2 women who became prisoners of war, Army specialists Melissa Rathbun-Nealy and David Lockett, were in a truck convoy that got lost and drove into Iraqi territory. "Wait," I said, "David, that's a man." Actually, Melissa Rathbun-Nealy and specialist David Lockett, a male soldier. They were captured together on January 30th. Rathbun-Nealy became the first American woman POW since World War II. She was held for 33 days before being released after the war. Her capture sparked intense debate back home. Critics said women shouldn't be in positions where they could be captured. Supporters said the risk of capture is inherent to military service, and women accept that risk just like men. Rathbun-Nealy herself said after her release that she'd been treated relatively well by Iraqi captors, and that her experience shouldn't be used to limit women's military roles. She was pragmatic about it. Capture is a risk for any soldier in a war zone. Flight Lieutenant Rhonda Cornum, an Army flight surgeon, was another female POW. She was on a search and rescue mission when her Black Hawk was shot down on February 27th. She suffered 2 broken arms and a bullet wound in the crash. Iraqi forces captured her and 4 other survivors. She was held for 8 days. After her release, she became an advocate for expanding women's military roles, arguing that her gender was irrelevant to her treatment and her ability to serve. Women also served in support roles that were absolutely critical to the war effort. Truck drivers hauling supplies through the desert, mechanics repairing vehicles and aircraft, communications specialists maintaining the networks that coordinated the entire operation, military police securing rear areas, intelligence analysts processing information. Every one of these jobs was essential to the war machine functioning. Sergeant Linda Bray commanded a military police unit that got into a firefight during the Panama invasion in '89. That was actually before Desert Storm, but her experience showed that women could handle combat situations. By Desert Storm, there were thousands of women in similar positions where combat contact was possible, and they handled it professionally every time. The cultural clash was real. Saudi Arabia in 1991 was deeply conservative. Women couldn't drive. They had limited rights. And here were American women soldiers, driving trucks, flying helicopters, carrying weapons, giving orders to men. Saudi authorities struggled with this. There were incidents where Saudi religious police tried to enforce local customs on American women soldiers, which the U.S. military firmly rejected. American women in uniform were subject to U.S. military regulations, not Saudi cultural restrictions. Captain Jennifer Walsh, the surgical nurse we've mentioned in other videos, said the gender dynamics were strange. We were treating wounded soldiers, making life-or-death medical decisions, working alongside male doctors and medics, but we weren't supposed to drive off base because of Saudi restrictions on women. It was surreal. The media coverage of women in Desert Storm was mixed. Some coverage was positive, highlighting women's contributions and competence. Other coverage focused on stereotypical concerns. How do women cope with desert conditions? What about hygiene facilities? Are they strong enough for military work? Women's service members found this patronizing. They weren't asking for special treatment. They wanted to do their jobs and be evaluated on performance, not gender. After Desert Storm, momentum built to repeal the combat exclusion laws. If women were already in combat in everything except official title, why maintain the legal fiction? In 1993, Congress repealed the law barring women from flying combat aircraft. In 1994, the Pentagon opened more combat roles to women. It was a gradual process, but Desert Storm was the catalyst that made change inevitable. The 13 women who died during Desert Storm are honored at military memorials alongside their male counterparts. They died in helicopter crashes, vehicle accidents, one in the Scud attack on Dhahran barracks. Their service and sacrifice were no different than the men who died. Major Rossi, Captain Kimberly Wheelhauer, Specialist Beverly Clark, their names deserve to be remembered. The impact on American society was significant. Millions of Americans watched women deploying to war on television. They saw women in uniform saying goodbye to their children, sometimes with fathers staying home as the primary caregiver, reversing traditional roles. They saw women flying aircraft, operating complex weapon systems, doing jobs that challenged old stereotypes about what women could or couldn't do. For women already in the military, Desert Storm was validation. They'd trained for years, often facing skepticism about whether they belonged. Desert Storm proved they could perform under pressure, that they were competent professionals, that gender didn't determine capability. That meant everything to women who'd fought institutional barriers to serve. The next generation of women service members benefited directly from Desert Storm veterans' experiences. When women were finally allowed in ground combat roles in 2016, it was a continuation of the path that Desert Storm women had started. Every barrier that fell, every restriction that lifted, Desert Storm helped make that possible. Today, women serve in every military occupational specialty, including infantry and special forces. They command combat units, fly fighters, serve on submarines. None of that would have happened, or would have happened as quickly, without the 41,000 women who deployed to Desert Storm and proved that women could serve anywhere, do anything, and meet any challenge. If you're a woman who served in Desert Storm, or if you served alongside women during the war, leave a comment below. This is part of the Desert Storm story that deserves more attention than it usually gets. The contributions women made, the barriers they broke, the progress they enabled, all of that matters. Thanks for watching Gulf War Chronicles. Desert Storm changed how America thought about women in the military. It wasn't perfect. There was still resistance, still barriers to overcome. But 41,000 women deployed, served with distinction, and made it impossible to maintain the old arguments about women's capabilities. That's a legacy worth honoring. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button. We're telling the complete story of Desert Storm, including the stories that challenge what we thought we knew. I'll see you in the next one.